Hiroshi Takeda would never forget the first time he saw the humming machine in the corner of the camp's mess hall. Its metallic body gleamed under the harsh lights, its glass front revealing bottles filled with a liquid so clear and colored it looked unreal. He stood frozen, unable to reconcile the sight before him. He had been taught that America was decadent, cruel, and starving for meaning. Yet here was a contraption that, with the push of a lever, released ice-cold soda, something he had only heard of as a rare luxury back home in Japan. The disbelief among the prisoners spread like ripples in a pond. Some muttered it had to be a trick, others whispered of poison, but no one could take their eyes off it. That moment was more than a cultural shock. It was a symbol of a world Hiroshi had never imagined. A world where even prisoners of war could be offered sweet, chilled drinks in the middle of a global conflict. And this was just the beginning of his transformation, a journey that would test his loyalty, his beliefs, and the very meaning of honor. Before we step deeper into Hiroshi's story, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more untold and human stories hidden within the shadows of World War II. These are not just tales of battles and strategies, but of individuals caught between cultures, ideologies, and survival. Hiroshi had been born in Osaka, raised in a family of teachers who valued discipline and tradition. He was 24 when he joined the Imperial Japanese Navy, convinced that serving his emperor was the noblest path a man could take. His world was simple then: duty above self, loyalty above doubt. Captured after a devastating naval battle in the Pacific, he carried within him a mixture of pride and shame. Pride because he had fought bravely. Shame because surrender had been forced upon him, and surrender was a word his culture despised. Now, standing in a U.S. prisoner of war camp, Hiroshi found himself face to face with contradictions that unsettled him. He had expected brutality, starvation, and humiliation. Instead, he saw rows of neat barracks, guards who kept their distance rather than their fists, and a dining hall where food was served at regular hours. None of this matched the fearsome tales he had been told in Japan. And then, there was that soda machine, a humming enigma that seemed to mock everything he thought he knew. The camp itself was located far from the chaos of the battlefields, nestled in the flat expanse of the American Midwest. The air smelled of tilled earth and wheat, so different from the humid salt air of the Pacific. At night, the wind carried the sound of crickets rather than artillery. For Hiroshi, this silence was both comforting and disturbing. The absence of war made the reality of captivity sharper. Around him, fellow prisoners reacted in different ways. Some, like Kenji Nakamura, a sharp-tongued man with a perpetually furrowed brow, muttered angrily about American tricks and refused to look at the machine again. Others, younger soldiers who had never tasted soda in their lives, stared with thinly veiled curiosity. Hiroshi himself tried to remain impassive, though his heart betrayed him, beating faster at the thought of something as simple as a cold drink. In those first days, Hiroshi clung to the image of his family and his homeland. He replayed memories of his mother's quiet voice, urging him to eat more rice before he left for service, of his father's stern eyes when he pledged loyalty to the emperor. Those memories steadied him when confusion threatened to take over, but the questions were there, gnawing silently. Could an enemy be both conqueror and host? Could a prison feel strangely orderly, even humane? The soda machine stood as an unanswered riddle, and Hiroshi would carry that question with him. His story had only just begun, and the path ahead would force him to confront not only the strangeness of American life, but also the shadows within himself. The sea was still raging when Hiroshi Takeda realized his ship would not survive the night. Smoke choked the deck, flames licked the sky, and the groan of metal twisted by explosions echoed like the cries of dying beasts. He clutched the railing, salt water stinging his eyes as the order to abandon ship rang out. The once proud vessel of the Imperial Japanese Navy was collapsing beneath him, swallowed by waves that cared little for loyalty or sacrifice. He plunged into the ocean, the cold shocking his body, his uniform dragging him down. For endless moments he fought against the pull of the sea, lungs screaming for air. Around him, sailors shouted, some in pain, others in desperation. The horizon glowed with fire, a haunting reminder that their war was not with the ocean, but with the relentless enemy whose shells had torn through their defenses. Hours blurred into a haze of survival. When dawn broke, Hiroshi floated among the wreckage, clinging to a piece of timber. The once proud fleet was gone. Above, the drone of aircraft circled, and then came the inevitable sight. American vessels approaching, their silhouettes dark against the rising sun. Hiroshi's heart tightened. Captivity, a word more shameful than death, was upon him. "Takeda!" a voice called from nearby. It was Kenji Nakamura, his comrade, bruised and bleeding but alive. His face twisted with both relief and bitterness. So this is how it ends? Fished out by the enemy like stray dogs? Hiroshi said nothing. He had no words to counter the weight of humiliation. Their capture was swift. American sailors pulled them aboard, offering blankets and canteens of water. Hiroshi refused at first, his pride stronger than thirst, but the dryness in his throat eventually forced him to drink. The water tasted no different, yet the act of accepting it felt like a betrayal etched into his soul. Days later, the prisoners were transferred to a larger transport ship bound for the United States. The voyage was long, filled with silence and unspoken dread. Hiroshi often sat on the deck, staring at the endless ocean. At night he dreamed of his parents and the streets of Osaka, now distant memories carried away by the tide. Kenji sat beside him one evening, his voice low but sharp. "Do you understand what this means? We are dead men walking. Even if we return, there will be no honor left for us." Hiroshi clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "We had no choice." "There is always a choice," Kenji spat. "Better to sink with the ship than to let them see us live like this." Their argument hung in the salty air, unresolved, as the ship pressed on. The American crew, though wary, treated the prisoners with a discipline Hiroshi had not expected. They were guarded but not mocked, watched but not beaten. Meals were given at regular times, bread and meat foreign to Hiroshi's tongue. He ate mechanically, the taste both nourishing and alien. When land finally appeared on the horizon, Hiroshi felt his chest tighten again. The coastline was vast, unfamiliar, dotted with towns and harbors that seemed untouched by the war raging across the Pacific. His stomach churned, not from seasickness but from the realization that he was entering the very heart of enemy territory. The prisoners were herded onto buses with barred windows, the countryside unfolding before them as the vehicles rumbled along. Hiroshi pressed his forehead to the glass, watching fields of corn and stretches of open sky unlike anything he had seen in Japan. Farmers in wide-brimmed hats worked the land, barely glancing at the convoy of POWs passing by. The casual indifference unsettled him. Did these people not hate him? Did they not see him as the monster he had been taught they would? Kenji muttered under his breath, "This is all a facade. Don't be fooled. Don't." They will show their true face soon. Hiroshi wanted to believe him, to cling to the certainty of hatred, but something inside whispered otherwise. The journey had stripped him of absolutes, leaving only questions. Each mile deeper into America was a step away from the world he had known. The camp awaited, and with it revelations that would challenge everything he thought he understood about enemies and survival. The buses rattled along uneven country roads, the sound of metal chains clinking faintly as the prisoners shifted in their seats. Hiroshi Takeda sat near the back, his hands resting stiffly on his knees, eyes fixed on the blur of farmland rolling past the barred windows. He had imagined America as a place of towering factories and sprawling military bases, a land consumed entirely by war. Instead, he saw endless fields, red barns standing against the horizon, and children playing near white fences, as if no war existed at all. The sight struck him harder than enemy gunfire ever had. Kenji Nakamura muttered, his voice dripping with disdain. "Look at them. Laughing, running. They know nothing of sacrifice. These people fatten themselves while our homeland burns." Hiroshi remained silent. The laughter of the children echoed in his ears, strange and haunting. He wondered if those children had fathers fighting somewhere in the Pacific, or if they were untouched by the reality he had bled for. The contrast unsettled him, gnawing at the certainties he had carried across the ocean. Hours later, the buses slowed. Guards straightened, rifles in hand, as the camp came into view. Tall fences topped with barbed wire encircled rows of wooden barracks. Guard towers stood at the corners, each with a soldier watching through binoculars. Hiroshi's breath caught. This was his new world, a cage in the middle of a foreign land. The gates opened and the buses rolled inside. The prisoners were ordered off, one by one. The gravel crunched under their boots as they lined up, staring at the strange mixture of severity and order. There were no jeers from the guards, no blows with rifle butts. Commands were sharp, but not cruel. The Americans herded them with efficiency, not hatred. It confused Hiroshi more than open hostility would have. A young officer stepped forward, his posture straight but his expression calm. His voice carried clearly as he spoke in practiced Japanese. "You will be assigned to barracks. Follow instructions, and you will not suffer." His accent was heavy, but his words were precise enough to surprise many of the prisoners. Hiroshi later learned his name, Lieutenant Robert Hayes. Kenji leaned toward Hiroshi, whispering, "Do not trust him. Polite words are just another weapon." Hiroshi's eyes, however, lingered on Hayes. The man's tone was not mocking or triumphant. It was measured, as though he regarded them as men rather than spoils. That small difference unsettled Hiroshi more than open contempt would have. Inside the barracks, the air smelled of sawdust and disinfectant. Rows of bunks stretched along the walls, thin mattresses laid neatly in place. A potbelly stove sat in the center, cold for now but promising warmth when needed. The space was stark, but compared to the cramped, filthy holds of transport ships, it felt almost civilized. One of the younger prisoners, his voice breaking with disbelief, whispered, "Is this really for us? Beds, stoves. This cannot be real." Kenji scowled. "Do not be fooled. Comfort is just another chain. Remember that." Hiroshi lay on the bunk assigned to him, the thin mattress oddly soft under his exhausted body. His mind swirled with contradictions, shame at being captured, relief at not being beaten, confusion at the orderliness of it all. He closed his eyes, but the images of America's fields and barns would not fade. The following morning, the prisoners were assembled outside. They were given uniforms marked with large PW letters, a brand of captivity that could not be mistaken. Hiroshi pulled the coarse fabric over his shoulders, the weight of humiliation heavier than the cloth itself. Yet around him, he noticed something else. Guards treating them with routine discipline rather than malice, as if this was merely procedure. Kenji hissed again. "This is a performance. Wait until they show their true face." But Hiroshi wondered if the true face of America was already visible, plain and baffling. A land both at war and at peace, brutal in battle, yet strangely orderly in captivity. As he watched the sun climb above the barbed wire, he felt the unsettling truth settle deeper in his chest. His journey was only beginning, and every step into this strange land seemed to dismantle another certainty he had once carried like armor. The days in the camp settled into a rhythm Hiroshi Takeda had not expected. Roll calls at dawn, work details assigned with precision, meals served on schedule. The barracks, though sparse, offered a kind of structure that soothed the chaos still ringing in his memory from the ocean battle. Yet beneath the routine, unease coiled like a hidden serpent. He knew that captivity was never meant to be comfortable, and he waited for the cruelty he had been taught to expect. The first true shock arrived one humid afternoon when the prisoners were marched toward the mess hall. The building was larger than the barracks, its windows letting in the dusty light of the Midwestern sun. Inside, the air carried the aroma of unfamiliar foods, bread baking, meat stewing, coffee brewing. Hiroshi's stomach twisted, caught between hunger and suspicion. Then his eyes fell on something that froze him in place. In the corner of the hall stood a metal contraption, humming softly, its polished surface reflecting the overhead lights. Behind its glass panel rested bottles filled with shimmering liquid, some dark, some bright, all sealed with shiny caps. The machine looked almost alive, a strange guardian of treasures from another world. Whispers spread quickly among the prisoners. "What is that?" one murmured. Another replied, his voice sharp with distrust. "It must be a trick. Poison, perhaps." Kenji Nakamura's expression hardened. He narrowed his eyes at the machine, as though it were mocking him. "This is their way of humiliating us," he said bitterly. "They flaunt their abundance, offering us scraps of their excess, expecting us to grovel." Hiroshi could not tear his gaze away. He had seen soda only once in his life, when a wealthy neighbor in Osaka hosted a party for foreign guests. Even then, it had been a luxury, a sparkling rarity. To see it here in the very place of his captivity, chilled and offered without ceremony, it was beyond comprehension. A guard, perhaps noticing their hesitation, spoke through a translator. "If you want, you may take one. It is safe. Refreshment." The word echoed strangely in Hiroshi's mind. Refreshment. How could the enemy offer something meant for comfort? He watched as one prisoner stepped forward, trembling but resolute. The man inserted a token given by the guards, pulled a lever, and out slid a cold bottle. Gasps rose from the others as he cracked it open, the hiss of carbonation startling in the silence. The man lifted the drink to his lips, sipped and closed his eyes. "It is sweet," he whispered, his tone filled with awe. A wave of murmurs swept through the hall. Some prisoners leaned forward eagerly, others recoiled in suspicion. Kenji spat on the floor. "A sweet lie. They want us to forget who we are." Hiroshi's chest tightened. He felt the pull of both sides, the curiosity that urged him to taste, and the loyalty that demanded he resist. His hand twitched as though reaching for something unseen. The bottle's glimmering surface seemed to call to him, but shame held him back. Later in the barracks, the debate continued. One younger soldier laughed nervously, saying, "It was like drinking snow mixed with sugar. I had never imagined such a thing." Kenji's voice cut through the chatter. "Fools. Every sip you take is another chain binding you to them. Do not forget your families. Do not forget the Emperor." Hiroshi lay silently on his bunk, staring at the wooden beams above him. The sound of the soda bottle opening replayed in his mind, the sharp fizzing like a question with no answer. Could something so simple carry such weight? He did not yet know, but he sensed this machine, this foreign luxury, was more than a novelty. It was the beginning of something deeper, something that would test him in ways the battlefield never had. The soda machine became a silent battlefield inside the camp, a constant reminder of the prisoners' divided loyalties. Some glanced at it with longing, others with disdain, but few dared to approach it again after that first man drank. Hiroshi Takeda felt the tension growing heavier each day. The sweet hiss of the bottle opening haunted him, both a temptation and a betrayal. During mealtime, the conversations among prisoners grew sharp. One young sailor whispered, "Maybe it is not poison. Maybe the Americans simply have more than we can imagine." Kenji Nakamura, sitting at the end of the table, slammed his fist down. "Silence! Do you hear yourself? To praise the enemy is to spit on your own family. Do not let their tricks rot your spirit." The others bowed their heads, yet Hiroshi noticed the flickers of doubt in their eyes. Hunger was one thing, but thirst for novelty, thirst for something beyond war, was harder to suppress. Later that evening, Kenji cornered Hiroshi near the bunks. His eyes burned with intensity. "You hesitate, Takeda. I see it in your face. Do not tell me you were tempted." Hiroshi steadied his voice. "Curiosity is not betrayal." Kenji stepped closer, his words sharp. "It begins with curiosity and ends with surrender. Remember this. They may feed us, shelter us, even hand us luxuries, but it is all poison. They want to soften us, make us forget our duty. You must resist." Hiroshi swallowed hard. He wanted to argue, to say that resistance should mean more than starving oneself of small mercies, but the weight of shame pressed against him. He remembered his father's stern gaze, his mother's quiet devotion. Could he justify sipping an American drink when his homeland suffered? The next day, another prisoner gave in. A boy barely 18, trembling as he held the cold bottle in his hands, lifted it to his lips. His eyes widened, a smile breaking across his face. "It's like drinking happiness," he whispered. The room erupted. Some laughed nervously, others cursed him under their breath. Kenji stormed out, disgust plain on his face. Hiroshi remained silent, but inside, turmoil raged. He envied the boy's simple joy, envied the way he allowed himself to embrace something without shame. That night, whispers spread in the barracks. If it is so abundant here, imagine how they live outside. Free men, not prisoners. Kenji's voice cut through the darkness, cold and certain. Do not be deceived. That machine is not a gift, it is a weapon. Every drop you swallow makes you weaker. But Hiroshi wondered, lying on his bunk with his eyes open to the dark ceiling, whether weakness was truly found in tasting or in fearing to taste. The question gnawed at him until sleep refused to come. The guards, indifferent to the prisoners' inner battles, continued their routines. They filled the machine, restocked the bottles and left without a word. To them it was ordinary, unremarkable. That indifference was perhaps the greatest insult of all. What was extraordinary to the prisoners was nothing to the Americans. One afternoon, as Hiroshi stood near the mess hall door, Lieutenant Hayes passed by. Their eyes met briefly. Hayes spoke in calm Japanese, almost casual. Strange, isn't it? Something so simple causing such turmoil. Hiroshi stiffened, unsure whether to answer. His silence seemed enough for Hayes, who gave a small nod before moving on. The officer's words echoed in Hiroshi's mind. Simple, yet powerful enough to divide men who had once fought side by side. By the week's end, lines had been drawn among the prisoners. Those who resisted the machine with iron discipline gathered under Kenji's stern gaze. Those who dared to taste, secretly or openly, carried their shame like a hidden scar. Hiroshi stood between them, pulled by both currents, unable to step fully into either camp. The soda machine remained, humming softly in its corner, a constant presence that demanded choices none of them had expected to face in captivity. For Hiroshi, its glow grew into a question he could no longer ignore. The tension surrounding the soda machine had reached a breaking point. For days, whispers swirled through the barracks, arguments flared in hushed tones, and silence settled heavily over mealtimes whenever someone's gaze lingered too long on the gleaming bottles. Hiroshi Takeda felt himself caught in a storm of longing and restraint, his pride battling curiosity every time the machine hummed in the background. It was during one sweltering afternoon, with the mess hall filled with the sticky heat of summer, that another prisoner finally broke the stalemate. He was a farmer's son from Kyushu, known for his easy laughter even in captivity. His hands shook as he slid the token into the slot. The clatter of the mechanism made every head turn. A bottle rolled into the tray below, its glass sweating with condensation. The boy lifted it, staring at the fizzing liquid inside as if it were a captured star. For a moment, no one breathed. Then he pulled off the cap, and the sharp hiss filled the room. He drank. His eyes widened, his throat worked, and then he smiled, a pure, unguarded smile. "It's cold," he said softly. Cold and sweet, like nothing I've ever known. The room erupted in low murmurs. Some shook their heads, muttering curses. Others looked away, ashamed of their own curiosity. Kenji Nakamura spat his disgust. "You disgrace yourself. To drink the enemy's nectar is to bow to them." But the boy only laughed, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "If this is weakness, then weakness is sweeter than strength." His words rippled through the room, both daring and dangerous. Hiroshi sat frozen, his heart pounding. He felt envy burn inside him, envy of the boy's courage to defy shame, envy of the pleasure written across his face. The fizzing sound still rang in Hiroshi's ears as if calling him. His mouth felt dry, though water sat untouched beside his tray. The days that followed blurred into a haze of whispered debates and stolen glances. A few more prisoners, emboldened by the farmer's son, tried the soda in secret. Their faces betrayed them, the fleeting joy, the guilt that followed. Each time Kenji's fury grew sharper, his words more venomous. One evening, Kenji confronted Hiroshi directly. "You watch them like a starving dog watches scraps. Do you intend to betray us too?" Hiroshi met his glare, forcing his voice to remain calm. Is it betrayal to taste something new? Does honor die with a sip? Kenji's jaw tightened. Yes, honor dies with weakness. And weakness begins here. He pointed toward the mess hall where the machine stood beyond the wall. I will not allow our spirit to rot. That night, Hiroshi lay awake, staring at the ceiling beams, listening to the faint hum of the machine in the distance. He thought of his family, of Osaka's crowded streets, of the emperor's stern visage in propaganda posters. He thought too of the fire of battle, of comrades lost to the ocean's depths. Was honor measured only in refusal, in denial? Or was there another kind of strength, one that came from facing the enemy's world without fear? The next day, the decision pressed itself upon him. The guards handed out tokens, the routine as casual as ever. Hiroshi stood in line, his palms slick with sweat. Kenji's eyes bored into him, warning him, daring him to step out of line. Hiroshi hesitated. Then slowly he slid the token into the machine. The clatter echoed in his chest. A bottle rolled forward, cool to the touch, droplets of water sliding down its glass like morning dew. He held it in his hands, heart racing. For a moment he considered walking away, proving his restraint. But something inside him urged him onward. He pulled the cap. The hiss was sharp, alive, almost defiant. He raised the bottle to his lips. The first sip was a shock, cold, biting bubbles dancing across his tongue. Then came the sweetness, rich and unfamiliar, unlike anything he had ever tasted. His throat tightened, not just from the drink but from the wave of emotions crashing inside him. Shame, wonder, longing, fear. He lowered the bottle, his breath unsteady. Around him, silence fell. Kenji's eyes burned with fury, but Hiroshi hardly noticed. He was too consumed by the revelation in his mouth. The enemy's world was not only power and destruction, it was abundance, indulgence, even joy. And he had tasted it. Hiroshi Takeda soon learned that the soda machine was only the beginning of the strangeness that captivity in America would bring. Each day in the camp revealed new shocks to his senses, each one quietly chipping at the armor of certainty he had carried across the ocean. The meals alone felt like a challenge to his very identity. Instead of rice steaming in bowls, miso soup, or pickled vegetables, there was bread, soft, spongy white bread that clung to his mouth. There was meat served in thick slices, sometimes swimming in gravies that smelled of butter and pepper. Coffee replaced tea, its bitterness sharp and unrelenting. At first, Hiroshi forced himself to eat only enough to survive, each bite carrying the taste of betrayal. But hunger gnawed at pride, and soon he found himself chewing slowly, grudgingly admitting that the food filled him in a way he could not deny. Still, he never finished a meal without longing for the taste of his mother's cooking, simple rice seasoned with nothing but familiarity. Across the barracks, reactions varied. Younger prisoners adapted more quickly, laughing as they experimented with peanut butter or canned peaches, sticky sweetness dripping from their fingers. Others turned away, their faces grim, refusing anything beyond the bare minimum. The clash of traditions echoed in every meal. Kenji Nakamura remained the loudest voice of resistance. "This food is poison to our spirit," he declared one evening, his tone seething with conviction. "Each bite erases who we are. They want us to forget Japan, to forget honor." A younger soldier dared to answer him, his voice hesitant but steady. "Is survival not also honor? If we die refusing, what meaning is left?" Kenji's glare silenced him, but Hiroshi felt the truth of the boy's words. He chewed his bread in silence, torn between shame and reluctant acceptance. The cultural clash extended beyond meals. Guards often played American music over radios in the camp, melodies carried by saxophones and swinging rhythms, unlike anything Hiroshi had ever heard. At first the sound grated, too loose, too free, too far from the disciplined drums of military marches he was used to. But sometimes late at night, when exhaustion softened his mind, he caught himself tapping a finger against his cot to the beat, startled by his own betrayal. Even in small rituals, the contrasts were sharp. The Americans encouraged cleanliness, issuing soap and expecting daily showers. To the Japanese prisoners, who valued bathing as a ritual of purification, The showers felt efficient but soulless, lacking the serenity of hot baths. The guards wore their uniforms with casual ease, shirts untucked at times, boots dusty, while Japanese officers within the camp demanded formality, drilling their men to bow, to sit properly, to never let their posture slacken. Hiroshi stood between these worlds, his mind unsettled. He wanted to cling to the rigid codes of home, yet he could not ignore the practical ease with which the Americans carried themselves. Was discipline the only path to dignity? Or was there strength, too, in the ability to move freely? One afternoon, Hiroshi found himself speaking quietly with Lieutenant Hayes, who observed him with a curious calm. Hayes asked in halting Japanese, "Do you miss your food?" Hiroshi hesitated, then nodded. "Rice is home. Here I eat, but I do not belong." Hayes gave a small smile. Home is powerful. But sometimes new things teach us more about who we are. His words lingered, unsettling Hiroshi with their simplicity. In the evenings, disputes broke out among the prisoners. Some argued that trying American food, music, or even learning English words was harmless curiosity. Others insisted it was betrayal in disguise. The barracks became divided, the atmosphere charged. For Hiroshi, the conflict deepened. He had tasted the enemy's drink. He had eaten their bread. He had heard their music creep into his bones. Each choice pulled him further from certainty, further from the man he once believed himself to be. And still, he could not stop wondering what these differences meant and what they revealed about the war beyond the barbed wire. When word spread that some prisoners would be sent outside the camp for work details, a wave of unease rippled through the barracks. For Hiroshi Takeda, the news felt like both a threat and an opportunity. To step beyond the fences was to risk humiliation, but it was also a chance to see the world that stretched beyond the barbed wire. At dawn, guards assembled groups of prisoners and loaded them onto trucks. Hiroshi climbed aboard, the wooden bed creaking under the weight of men who sat stiffly, eyes darting with suspicion. Kenji Nakamura muttered beside him, his voice sharp. "Do not be fooled. They are not giving us freedom, they are making us labor for their gain." The trucks rumbled across miles of countryside. Hiroshi stared through the slats, taking in fields that stretched endlessly under the sun. Rows of corn swayed in the breeze, their stalks tall and green, while red barns punctuated the horizon. It was farmland vast beyond anything he had seen in Japan, where mountains often pressed close against villages. When they arrived, the prisoners were led to a farm owned by a middle-aged couple. The farmer, broad-shouldered with skin tanned by years of sun, regarded them with a mixture of caution and practicality. His wife, carrying a basket of tools, offered a polite nod before turning back to her chores. They did not spit or curse, nor did they welcome them warmly. To Hiroshi, the indifference was startling. The work was simple but demanding, pulling weeds, repairing fences, harvesting crops under the blazing sky. Hiroshi's hands, though trained for handling rifles and naval tools, soon blistered on farm equipment. Sweat poured down his back, the heat oppressive, yet the rhythm of labor was grounding. For hours there were no arguments about honor or betrayal, only the steady pull of the earth demanding attention. During a break, the farmer's wife appeared with a jug of water. She handed it to the guard, who in turn offered it to the prisoners. The water was cool, drawn from a well, and it slid down Hiroshi's throat with startling clarity. She stood nearby, watching without hostility, her face unreadable. Hiroshi bowed his head slightly, unsure if she noticed. Kenji scowled, refusing the water. "Do not drink their kindness. It is another trap." Hiroshi wiped his mouth, silent, but inside he felt something shift. The farmer's wife had shown no triumph, no mockery, only a gesture of necessity, as if sharing water was as natural as breathing. The day dragged on, the sun sinking lower, casting long shadows across the fields. As they loaded back onto the truck, Hiroshi glanced toward the farmhouse. A boy stood near the porch, no older than 10, clutching a baseball glove. Their eyes met briefly. The boy's gaze held no hatred, only curiosity, as though trying to understand why these strangers worked his family's land under guard. Back at the camp, the prisoners spoke in low voices about their experiences. Some complained of exhaustion. Others marveled at the vastness of American farms. One man whispered, "Did you see? Even gas stations out there have those machines, soda cold and ready like it cost them nothing." The words tightened Hiroshi's chest. Again, the machine appeared, this time beyond the camp, a fixture of American life, not just captivity. It was a reminder that abundance here was not illusion, it was reality. Kenji, hearing the whispers, lashed out, "Do not let your hearts wander. This land is not paradise. It is the enemy's soil soaked in the blood of our comrades. Never forget that." Hiroshi sat quietly, but his thoughts churned. The fields, the farmer's wife, the boy on the porch, they lingered in his mind. None of it fit the picture of savages he had been taught. And the more he saw, the more the image of America grew complicated, impossible to reduce to enemy or ally. The barbed wire no longer felt like the only barrier. Something deeper now divided Hiroshi, from the world he once knew and from the man he was becoming. The days of farm work became routine, and with them came small but powerful shifts inside Hiroshi Takeda's heart. The first time he noticed it was during a water break, when Lieutenant Robert Hayes approached the prisoners, not with threats or scorn, but with something that looked almost like curiosity. Hayes was young, barely older than Hiroshi, his uniform neat but worn at the cuffs. His Japanese was halting, but he tried. "You work hard," Hayes said, pointing at Hiroshi, his voice careful. Hiroshi blinked, unsure whether to respond. Finally, he inclined his head slightly. "Work keeps hands busy." His words came slow, broken, but Hayes nodded as if they were complete. From then on, Hayes lingered when he could. He asked simple questions, offering English words in return. Hiroshi learned corn, field, sky, while Hayes learned komi, rice, and umi, sea. Their exchanges were clumsy, often ending in laughter when misunderstandings piled too high. But beneath the stumbles, something fragile grew. Recognition that enemy lines did not erase shared humanity. Back in the camp, Hiroshi began teaching some of the younger soldiers the words Hayes had given him. They mocked him at first, but curiosity won. Soon they repeated phrases under their breath, practicing when no officers were near. One evening, Hayes surprised the prisoners by rolling a ball toward them across the dusty yard. It was scuffed, leather stretched tight with red stitches. "Baseball," he said, holding a bat. The prisoners eyed him warily. Kenji Nakamura scoffed, turning away. "A child's game. Do they think we are fools?" But others watched as Hayes swung the bat, the crack of wood against leather sharp in the air. He gestured, inviting them to try. Slowly, a few stepped forward, awkwardly imitating his stance. Laughter broke out, real, unguarded laughter, when one man swung too hard and spun in a full circle, landing in the dust. Against his better judgment, Hiroshi felt himself smiling. He took the bat when it came to him, gripping it uncertainly. Hayes adjusted his hands with a quick gesture, nodding in encouragement. Hiroshi swung, connecting clumsily but solidly with the ball. The cheer from the other prisoners startled him, a burst of joy that cut through the heaviness of the camp. That night in the barracks, the men whispered excitedly. "Did you see Takeda's hit?" One laughed. "Almost sent the ball flying over the fence." Kenji's face was stone. "Pathetic. They make you laugh so you forget you are captives. Do not forget who you are." But Hiroshi could not deny what he had felt, the exhilaration of a game, the simple joy of moving without fear. The sound of the bat meeting the ball lingered in his chest like a heartbeat. In the following weeks, baseball games became a quiet ritual. The guards watched, sometimes even cheering. Soda bottles appeared afterward, offered like prizes. Some prisoners refused, but others drank, their guilt dulled by the taste of something cold after a long day in the sun. Hiroshi too accepted one again, this time without hesitation. The fizz on his tongue mingled with the lingering laughter of the game, and for a fleeting moment, the barbed wire seemed less suffocating. One evening, as the sun set in orange streaks across the sky, Hayes approached Hiroshi. "You... good," he said, miming a swing. Hiroshi shook his head. "No, but fun." The word felt strange in his mouth, foreign yet warm. Hayes grinned. Yes. Fun? The simplicity of it unsettled Hiroshi. Fun was not a word he had associated with war, with captivity, with honor. And yet, there it was, undeniable and real. In those small moments, shared words, shared games, shared laughter, Hiroshi began to sense the cracks forming in the wall he had built inside himself. Bonds, however fragile, were taking shape. And with them came a dangerous thought. Perhaps the enemy was not what he had always believed. The laughter from baseball and the sweetness of soda had created cracks in the walls of discipline, and those cracks were beginning to widen. The camp no longer moved in unison. It was divided, two invisible factions living under the same roof. On one side stood Kenji Nakamura and the hardliners, men who clung fiercely to the old codes of loyalty, denouncing every smile, every sip, every word of English. On the other stood those who allowed themselves moments of adaptation, who dared to taste, laugh, or play. Hiroshi Takeda found himself straddling the fragile line between them. One evening, the tension finally erupted in the barracks. A group of younger prisoners whispered excitedly about a baseball game they had won earlier, imitating swings with broom handles. Their laughter filled the room until Kenji rose to his feet, his voice cutting like a blade. "Have you no shame?" he thundered. "You dishonor the Emperor with every foolish cheer. We are warriors, not clowns for the enemy's amusement." The room fell silent. One of the young men, emboldened, dared to answer. "We are prisoners, Nakamura-san. Warriors, yes, but captives. What harm is there in finding joy where we can?" Kenji's hand lashed out, striking the boy across the face. Gasps filled the room. Hiroshi rose instinctively, stepping between them. "Enough, Kenji. Violence will not bring us honor." Kenji's eyes narrowed, fury burning. "And what will?" "Surrendering your dignity for a game. Drinking their poison like a dog. You, Takeda, you were once an officer. Have you forgotten what it means to serve?" Hiroshi's chest tightened. He wanted to shout back, to tell Kenji that honor was not so easily measured, that survival itself carried dignity. But the words caught in his throat, choked by the weight of shame and doubt. The division grew sharper in the days that followed. Men whispered in corners, glancing toward Kenji and his circle, fearful of being labeled traitors to their heritage. Others looked to Hiroshi, though he offered no clear answers. He became a symbol of hesitation, a man torn between loyalty and the undeniable pull of humanity, glimpsed through soda, baseball, and laughter. Tension spilled even into the work details. On a farm one afternoon, a younger prisoner hummed an American tune he had overheard on the radio. The sound carried across the field until Kenji's glare silenced him. That night, the boy's bunk was overturned, his few possessions scattered. No one admitted to it, but everyone knew it was a warning. Hiroshi could not escape the storm. He felt eyes on him whenever he approached the soda machine, whenever he spoke with Hayes, whenever he let slip an English word. At night, he wrote in his journal, the pages filling with questions he dared not speak aloud. What is honor, if it blinds us to truth? What is loyalty if it means denying the life before our eyes? One evening, Hayes lingered near the barracks as the men filed in. His gaze found Hiroshi's, and in quiet Japanese he said, "Your peoples are divided." Hiroshi hesitated before answering. Divided, yes, but strong. The words rang hollow even to his own ears. Inside, Kenji gathered his followers. His voice carried through the walls, sharp and urgent. "We must hold fast. Anyone who yields to their temptations is no brother of ours. Mark my words, we will not be broken by soda, games, or false kindness." Hiroshi lay awake, the barracks buzzing with whispered loyalties and unspoken fears. The soda machine hummed faintly in the mess hall, a reminder of the choices that had split them apart. For Hiroshi, the weight of silence grew unbearable. He knew a decision would soon be forced upon him, whether to stand with Kenji's unbending defiance or to admit that the world outside Japan held truths too powerful to ignore. The camp's routines carried on with the same order, roll calls, meals, work details, but the air changed the moment news from abroad seeped through the barbed wire. It came first in whispers, carried by guards who spoke too freely near prisoners. then confirmed by the radio that sometimes played in the mess hall. Japan's cities were burning. Hiroshi Takeda sat at a wooden table, his hands clasped tightly together as the Japanese language broadcast echoed through the room. Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, names that carried memories of family and youth, were listed with grim detail. Whole districts reduced to ash, thousands dead. The words struck him like blows, each one tearing at the wall he had built around his heart. Beside him, one man pressed his forehead to the table, muttering prayers under his breath. Another clenched his fists, knuckles white, eyes blazing with helpless rage. Kenji Nakamura's voice rang out with bitterness. "Do you hear it? Our homeland is scorched, yet here you sit drinking their poison, laughing at their games. Every smile you give them is a betrayal of the dead." The room grew tense, eyes shifting toward Hiroshi. He said nothing, though inside his chest a storm raged. His mind filled with images of Osaka, his parents' modest home, his mother's garden. Was it gone now? Had fire swallowed it whole? That night, Hiroshi wrote in his journal by the dim light aloud in the barracks. "If home is ashes, what does loyalty mean? If the emperor cannot shield our families, what is honor left to defend?" His hand trembled as he wrote, guilt mingling with grief. Days later, more news arrived, this time about battles lost across the Pacific. Entire garrisons had fallen, soldiers surrendering in places where surrender had once been unthinkable. The effect on the prisoners was immediate. Some grew despondent, staring blankly at the ground, while others clung more desperately to their identity, refusing to admit defeat even as reality closed in. One evening, a heated argument broke out in the yard. A younger prisoner dared to say aloud what many feared in silence: "Perhaps Japan cannot win." Kenji struck him to the ground, roaring, "Silence! To speak such words is treason." Hiroshi stepped forward, pulling Kenji back. "Enough! He only spoke what is already known in our hearts." Kenji's eyes burned. "And you, Takeda, have you joined them? Will you abandon your duty too?" Hiroshi met his gaze, his jaw tight. Duty does not erase truth. The confrontation left the camp buzzing, divisions deepening. Some looked to Kenji as a rock of defiance, others began to see him as a relic of a world slipping away. Hiroshi, caught between grief for his homeland and the undeniable realities of captivity, became a reluctant voice for those who could no longer pretend. Lieutenant Hayes, noticing the turmoil, approached Hiroshi during a work detail. In his broken Japanese, he said softly, "News, hard, family." Hiroshi hesitated, then answered with a question of his own. "When your cities burn, Hayes-san, do you still fight?" Hayes was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "We fight, but also rebuild." The simplicity of the answer struck Hiroshi like an echo from the future, one he could not yet imagine but longed to believe. Back in the barracks, silence stretched heavy each night. Men clung to fragments of memory, songs hummed under their breath, stories retold of mothers, wives, children. Hiroshi found himself listening more than speaking, his heart tightening with each reminder that the world they left behind might no longer exist. The soda machine still hummed in the mess hall, its bottles glowing like forbidden jewels. To some, it was a symbol of the enemy's abundance, mocking their loss. To Hiroshi, it was becoming something else, a reminder that life moved on even as fire consumed the past. The war outside the fences was shifting, and with every report carried across the airwaves, Hiroshi felt his old certainties collapse like the cities reduced to ash. The camp simmered with tension, a quiet fire that needed only the smallest spark to erupt. The news of Japan's losses had unsettled everyone, and whispers of despair moved through the barracks like restless winds. Hiroshi Takeda felt the weight pressing down on him daily. Kenji Nakamura's accusing stares, the uncertainty of his fellow prisoners, the gnawing grief for his homeland. Something had to give, and when it did, the break was sudden and fierce. It began after a work detail, when a group of prisoners gathered in the yard. The younger men, exhausted, spoke openly of their doubts. "Japan cannot win now," one said, his voice low but steady. "We are finished. Perhaps surrender is the only path left." Kenji's roar silenced the air. He surged forward, striking the man across the mouth. Blood glistened on the boy's lip as Kenji shouted, "You dishonor our dead! Coward! Traitor!" Hiroshi stepped in, shoving Kenji back. "Enough!" He only spoke what many think but fear to say. Kenji's fury turned on him, his eyes burning with betrayal. "You, Takeda, you too? You once stood for honor. Now you side with weaklings and fools." Hiroshi's voice shook, but he did not back down. "I side with truth. Our cities burn, our armies fall. Pretending otherwise is not honor, it is blindness." The crowd erupted in shouts, some siding with Kenji, others with Hiroshi. Guards rushed in, rifles ready, their shouts cutting through the chaos. The fight dissolved, but the division remained carved deep, impossible to mend. That night Kenji confronted Hiroshi in the barracks, his voice sharp as a blade. "You shame us all. You drink their poison, play their games, now you spread their defeatism. You are no better than them." Hiroshi met his glare. "I am still Japanese, but I will not live in lies. If survival means learning from the enemy, then I will learn." Kenji's face twisted with disgust. "You are already lost." The words stung, but Hiroshi did not flinch. He lay awake afterward, heart pounding, the silence heavy with unspoken threats. Around him, men shifted uneasily in their bunks, caught between two visions of loyalty. The breaking point had come, not in the clash of fists, but in the fracture of conviction. Hiroshi felt it in every look cast his way. Suspicion from some, quiet respect from others. He was no longer just another prisoner. He was a line drawn in the sand. The following day, Lieutenant Hayes noticed the bruises and tension among the men. He approached Hiroshi during a work detail, speaking softly. "You fight and with your own people." Hiroshi's reply was bitter. "Sometimes the hardest battles are not against the enemy." Hayes studied him for a moment, then nodded. "War. Always inside, too." His words, simple but weighty, echoed in Hiroshi's mind long after. Back in the camp, Kenji gathered his loyalists, whispering plans of resistance, secret meetings, silent oaths to reject every trace of American influence. They watched Hiroshi with hostile eyes, waiting for him to falter. Yet Hiroshi felt something shift within himself. He had crossed a threshold he could not return from. He had tasted soda, played baseball, spoken English words, admitted truths Kenji could not bear. Each step marked him as different, but it also freed him from the chains of denial. As the sun set behind the barbed wire, painting the yard in shadows, Hiroshi stood alone, the air heavy with the aftermath of division. The breaking point had passed, and nothing in the camp would ever be the same again. The fracture in the camp did not heal. Instead, it carved new paths, and Hiroshi Takeda found himself walking one of them alone. No longer bound fully to Kenji Nakamura's circle of hardliners, yet not entirely embraced by those who eagerly sought American comforts, he became something else, a man searching for balance, and in that search he began to change. It started with language. Lieutenant Hayes, persistent in his quiet way, continued teaching Hiroshi English words. At first, Hiroshi repeated them reluctantly, the sounds awkward in his mouth, but slowly he began stringing them together, practicing with the younger prisoners who found secret joy in learning. Sky-bred friend. Words that once carried no meaning now carried bridges. One evening, Hayes approached as Hiroshi scribbled in his journal. Pointing, Hayes asked, "You write?" Hiroshi hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, my thoughts, memory." Hayes smiled faintly. "Good, important, to remember, also to share." His broken Japanese mixed with halting English, but the intent was clear. Hiroshi closed his journal protectively, yet inside he felt a strange warmth. The enemy was not prying, he was encouraging. Beyond language, Hiroshi noticed other changes. The bread he once chewed with resentment now tasted less like betrayal and more like sustenance. Coffee, bitter at first, became a ritual of alertness he grew to respect. Even the strange sweetness of soda no longer carried only guilt. It reminded him of resilience, of finding life in unexpected places. Kenji's words still haunted him, echoing with venom. "You are already lost." Yet Hiroshi began to see loss differently. Perhaps he had lost one identity, yes, but in its place another was being forged. Not American, not disloyal, but broader, shaped by survival and adaptation. The baseball games became symbols of this shift. What began as hesitant play grew into full contests, prisoners cheering and laughing in ways that softened the hard edges of captivity. Hiroshi no longer resisted. He swung the bat with focus, ran the bases with exhilaration, felt the sting of dust in his throat as proof he was alive. When soda bottles clinked afterward, he accepted his share without shame. In quiet moments, Hiroshi shared fragments of Japanese culture with Hayes and curious guards. He described the festival lanterns of Osaka, the scent of tatami mats after summer rain, the sound of koto strings played at family gatherings. To his surprise, Hayes listened intently, asking questions, scribbling notes. "Different," he said one day, but beautiful. That word struck Hiroshi deeply. Beautiful. The idea that his homeland could be admired even by an enemy unsettled him, but it also softened his anger. Perhaps not everything was mockery or propaganda. Still, conflict simmered. Kenji and his circle watched Hiroshi with disdain, whispering accusations of betrayal. Some nights Hiroshi felt their stares heavy as weights pressing into his back, but he no longer bowed under them. Instead, he wrote more in his journal, sketching words in both Japanese and the English Hayes had taught him. In those pages, he began weaving a new vision of himself, not bound by rigid absolutes, but searching for truth wherever it appeared. One night, as crickets sang beyond the fence, a young soldier approached Hiroshi quietly. "Takeda-san," he whispered, "teach me the words you learned. I want to understand." Hiroshi looked at him, saw both fear and hope in his eyes, and nodded. "Yes, we will learn together." It was in that moment Hiroshi understood the depth of his transformation. He was no longer merely enduring captivity. He was shaping meaning within it. He had crossed from passive survival into active growth, carving out dignity not by denying change, but by embracing it. And though the war still raged far beyond the fences, Hiroshi felt a seed of resilience within himself, one that no enemy, no shame, could take away. The summer of 1945 arrived heavy with heat and uncertainty. Rumors had grown louder for weeks, spreading across the camp like sparks in dry grass. Some said Germany had already surrendered, others whispered of secret weapons that could end the war in a single blow. Hiroshi Takeda listened quietly, his heart torn between dread and hope. He sensed something irreversible was approaching, though he could not yet name it. The confirmation came one sweltering afternoon, when the guards assembled the prisoners in the yard. A radio broadcast was played in Japanese, its solemn tones echoing across the camp. Hiroshi stood rigid, his breath caught in his chest. The voice carried the unthinkable truth. Japan had surrendered. The emperor himself had spoken. The war was over. For a long moment, silence held the camp. Then it fractured. Some prisoners wept openly, their cries raw and guttural. Others shouted in disbelief, refusing to accept what they had heard. Kenji Nakamura dropped to his knees, his fists pounding the dirt. "Lies! Propaganda! The emperor would never yield!" His voice broke, shattering into a hoarse whisper. "Never!" Hiroshi felt the weight of the words settle into his bones. His homeland, the empire he had sworn to serve, had laid down its arms. The pride he had carried as a naval officer collapsed under the reality of defeat. Yet beneath the grief another feeling stirred: relief. The killing was over. No more cities reduced to ash. No more comrades swallowed by the sea. That night, the barracks buzzed with restless voices. Some men cursed the Americans, others cursed the emperor, unable to reconcile the surrender with the ideals drilled into them since childhood. Hiroshi sat quietly, his journal open on his lap. He wrote slowly, each word deliberate. "The war has ended, but we are still alive." Perhaps that is enough for now. Days turned into weeks as the camp shifted. Guards no longer carried the same tension. Their orders softened. Work details lessened. Meals became steadier. There was talk of repatriation, of going home. The word home now carried both hope and dread. What waited for them beyond the ocean? Cities in ruins. Families gone. Hiroshi could not know, and the uncertainty gnawed at him. One afternoon, Lieutenant Hayes approached him. "Soon you go home," Hayes said in careful Japanese. Hiroshi nodded, his throat tight. "Home. Changed." Hayes studied him, then placed a hand briefly on his shoulder. "Yes, changed. But you also changed." The gesture, simple and human, struck Hiroshi deeply. In Hayes's eyes he saw not enemy or captor but recognition. They had walked through war on opposite sides, yet here they stood, bound by something larger than victory or defeat. When the day of release finally arrived, the prisoners were given clean clothes, meager possessions, and instructions for transport. As Hiroshi stepped toward the gate, he paused, turning back for one last look. The barracks, the yard, even the soda machine in the mess hall, strange symbols of captivity, had become markers of his transformation. Kenji, still defiant, muttered bitterly, "We leave as broken men." Hiroshi shook his head gently. "Not broken. Changed. There is a difference." Kenji spat on the ground, but Hiroshi no longer carried his scorn like a burden. He felt lighter, as though accepting change had freed him. As the convoy rolled out of the camp, Hiroshi pressed his hand against the window, watching the American countryside blur past. Fields of corn swayed in the summer wind, children waved from porches, and gas stations with soda machines flickered by like fragments of another life. He knew he would carry these images back across the ocean, stitched into his memory alongside loss and survival. The war had ended, but Hiroshi's journey was not finished. Ahead lay a homeland forever altered, and a future uncertain. Yet within him, something steady remained, the quiet strength born of adaptation, of seeing humanity even in the enemy's land. The ship carrying Hiroshi Takeda and his fellow prisoners docked at a ruined port in Japan. The shoreline was scarred, warehouses collapsed, cranes rusting in silence. Smoke still lingered in the distance, rising faintly from neighborhoods that had been firebombed months earlier. The homeland he had longed for was not the one he had left. As Hiroshi stepped onto Japanese soil, a heavy truth settled in his chest. Nothing would ever be the same. The streets of Osaka confirmed it. Blocks of houses were flattened, shops reduced to rubble, temples blackened with soot. Survivors moved slowly through the ruins, their faces gaunt, their eyes weary. Hiroshi searched among them for his family, his heart pounding with both dread and desperate hope. After days of inquiry, he found them, alive, but changed. His mother's hair had turned white, his father's shoulders stooped. Their embrace carried both joy and grief, as though welcoming back a son from death itself. Yet even in that reunion, Hiroshi felt the weight of his captivity. He struggled to describe his years in America, ashamed to admit that within barbed wire he had discovered not only suffering but also humanity. When his father asked, "Were you treated harshly?" Hiroshi hesitated before answering. "Not as we were told. Different. Strange." He did not speak of the soda machine at first. It seemed too trivial beside the ruins of his city, too absurd against the backdrop of war. And yet in quiet moments he remembered it vividly, the gleam of bottles, the hiss of carbonation, the shock of sweetness on his tongue. It had been his first glimpse of a world beyond propaganda, the first step toward questioning the absolutes he once held sacred. In the months that followed, Hiroshi worked alongside his neighbors, clearing rubble, planting vegetables in scorched soil, salvaging wood to rebuild. The discipline he had carried from the Navy gave him strength, but it was the adaptability he had learned in captivity that guided him most. He no longer clung blindly to the rigidity of old codes. Instead, he found meaning in resilience, in rebuilding not just homes but spirits. Kenji Nakamura's path diverged sharply. When Hiroshi encountered him again, Kenji's bitterness remained etched into his face. "You came back smiling," he accused. "You drank their lies, and now you pretend it makes you stronger." Hiroshi met his words with calm. "I did not return smiling. I returned alive. And I will use what I learned to help us live again." Kenji shook his head, walking away. His shadow lingered in Hiroshi's mind, a reminder of how some chains could never be broken. As seasons changed, Hiroshi spoke more openly about his time in America. To younger neighbors, he described baseball games in dusty yards, English words exchanged awkwardly with a foreign lieutenant, and yes, even the soda machines that seemed like magic in their simplicity. People listened with a mixture of disbelief and wonder. For many, his stories became glimpses of a world they had never imagined, a world beyond destruction. One evening, watching the sun sink behind the half-rebuilt rooftops, Hiroshi wrote in his journal, "The enemy gave us captivity, but also strange lessons. I feared dishonor, but found survival. I clung to pride, but discovered humanity. If soda can flow freely in a machine for prisoners, then perhaps kindness too can appear in unexpected places." The memory of Hayes stayed with him as well. The young American officer who had taught him words, encouraged him to write, and treated him with respect, even when war said they should be enemies. Hiroshi often wondered if Hayes had survived, if he too carried memories of their fragile bond. Looking back, Hiroshi understood that the soda machine had been more than a novelty. It had been a symbol, a shock that cracked open his certainty and let in questions, growth, and resilience. It taught him that even in captivity, one could transform. And that transformation became his legacy. Hiroshi's story is just one among countless untold lives shaped by war, captivity, and unexpected humanity. To uncover more hidden stories like his, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these voices alive. And don't forget to click the video on your screen to continue exploring the overlooked chapters of World War II history.